Hey, this is Mark Goldberg with the UN Affairs blog UN Dispatch.
And this is Matthew Lee of Inner City Press back at the UN.
Hey, how you doing, Matthew?
Pretty good. What's going on, Mark?
Good. So before we dive into things, I just have a blag. Maybe
PSA.
it's a flag because we're on video to sort of regular viewers and regular commenters. You know, I try to, every other week Matthew and I have our back and forth, but on the off week, I've been trying to bring in sort of as diverse a group of people as I could, talking about different things. But what do you want to see? What kind of issues do you want to see me cover, and who do you want to see me interview? What, climate change, more international criminal court, and the general scope of sort of international affairs or whatever. Just let me know what you want to see. So,
and I'm gonna actually. I was joking, but I think I will make a pitch, which is that.
So what do you want to see?
No, I want since it's about off weeks. In the off week, when I have so much time on my hands, what people think should be looked into at the UN. I always ask people that are here, like, if they think of a question that should be asked. So I just throw that out there, that I'm very much open to.
Or alternatively, Matthew, what if we turned over the camera to you sometime on some of these off weeks, and you could.
I'm ready. We just had Jeffrey Sachs downstairs. We've had a Mia Farrow passing through with various
well,
people.
These are stars.
They're the celebrity connection is.
So last time we talked, you were in Khartoum.
That's true.
You've made it out alive.
In a darkened room. I'm back.
You were in a darkened room.
Yeah.
And so you're back.
Yeah, no, it really, and I think when we spoke was actually right before this delegation of Security Council ambassadors went to Darfur. So and then from there they went to Chad and Congo, and there was actually a side trip to Rwanda because of a bullet through a plane. But I want to make sure we don't just do a travel log. So we'll try to keep it thematic.
We won't do a travel log, but maybe we should start in Darfur because that's sort of where you went next.
Sure.
Where were you able to see did they take you to an IDP camp?
They sure did. And it's actually one that, back on the celebrity front, after the fact, I found that Mia Farrow and George Clooney has gone there. This is a well-known camp. I mean, I don't mean to make light of it. It's called the Zamzam camp. It's about 16 kilometers outside of El Fasher. So, and it's heavily militarized. There's no question. I mean, myself and another reporter, we tried to break away from the group and speak with people, and it wasn't. It's to the humanitarian agency's credit that food is being delivered, and in fact, people from the surrounding area actually go to this camp to get food. But there's just a lot of it's help. I mean, I don't obviously there's the army, sort of the Sudanese army and military sort of lurking around and looking, but I mean the UN people are pretty well armed too, and a couple of people we spoke to were sort of. Really, I don't want to say that they didn't distinguish between the two. I know it'd be popular to say everyone said Janjaweed. That's not all we heard. We heard a sort of a generalized malaise at the level of armaments and threats. And it was sort of, and then on the other hand, and a lot of the other journalists, we were taken. I guess in the government of Sudan sort of asked for equal time throughout this 3-day trip to Sudan. So that I think the last time we spoke, they made a point of showing where the justice and equality movement had attacked Khartoum while we were in El Fasher, which is the capital of North Darfur. After visiting the camp, the whole delegation went to visit a guy called the Wali of North Darfur, who, frankly, we were joking the grass is greener in the Wali side of the world, or in Wali's world, because this guy's in El Fasher, and he has a kind of a compound that has grass. There were people singing. There's a big kind of hall for religious things, and so the ambassador of Sudan to the UN was there translating for the Wali. And the Wali said he said some things like there's no problem in Darfur, or there were some things that were pretty indefensible. But he also did sort of took on the French ambassador and said, what about this kidnapping of Sudanese children by Zoe Zark? And the French ambassador said, that was we didn't pardon the NGO. There's a whole story behind that, which maybe we'll stick with. But it's so.
Well, we've talked about that.
Yeah, we have exactly. So I mean, I think that on balance, and then we flew back very, very quickly from this. I think the one thing that I would say is that I'm aware that we went to sort of in a way the most peaceful part of Darfur. And even with that, most of the food convoys, about half of them are being hijacked on the roads. That was a big thing that came up, that WFP is cutting its food rations in half because the trucks are being hijacked on the road from El Obeid.
Yeah.
And so there was some dispute
well,
about.
and sorry,
no, not at
to
all.
jump in,
Please.
From the press release that they put out about having to cut their rations had to do with funding as well.
No, I'm always amazed. Yeah, I'm amazed by that. Given all the I mean, we had this since I've been back. We had the U.S. did an informal council meeting on Darfur and said they've given $100 million. I guess that's for training African troops. But it always amazes me with all the governments sort of intoning about it that like where is the money? But I will I'll just say that when we were there was a woman from the WFP's main spokesperson for Sudan came from Khartoum with us, and she said 75 trucks have been hijacked, 50 of the trucks have never been recovered, 36 of the drivers have never been found. So that's that's pretty troubling.
That's
And it seemed, I mean, this is the one, I guess, in looking to try to sort of either nuance, some say, it's the government, it's most people agree that the hijacking of trucks is banditry, that it's not necessarily of a political.
Yeah.
I mean, well, we were there when I say most people.
It's political to the extent that it's how these rebel groups sustain themselves.
Well, there we go. Okay. No. I'm sorry. At least you're. But I mean, I think there were a lot of people that were sort of like, it is the responsibility of the Sudanese government to protect those trucks. I even heard some people saying maybe it's somehow a war crime that they're not protecting the trucks. I will say, just again, maybe it's looking for controversy or just trying to be. Given what we last talked about this attack by GEM that almost reached Khartoum, I'm not saying that Sudanese government doesn't have the resources to do both, but it's not incomprehensible to me that they'd say we're going to defend ourselves from being overthrown. So I guess my thought, having been there, is in El Fasher, I talked to a number of peacekeepers. I talked to these Gambian guys that were there, and speaking, they said don't use their name, but they've been there for many months and they've hardly left the compound.
Yeah.
And they, in fact, were eager. To their credit, they were like, we want to defend the people of Darfur, but they were in there.
I mean, that's the whole problem with these force multipliers that aren't making their way to Darfur, like the helicopters.
I think it's a choice. I mean, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it's right. I don't know. I think I'm not sure that there's been a decision at the level of UNAMID or the peacekeeping operations of the UN to say we are going to at least undertake to protect some of the food convoys. Do you see what I mean? And that was, I'm not saying it could solve everything. I'm not saying that the government of Sudan doesn't have a responsibility. But if literally, like, people are going hungry because trucks, unprotected trucks are being hijacked, like, what is it? I've been asking since I got back. Is it within the mandate of UNAMID to protect the trucks? Yes. They could do it. So I'm just trying to sort of...
I mean, like, it's... They could do it because it's in the mandate, or they're legally sanctioned to do it. But are they physically capable of doing it is the problem. I mean, so UNAMID has about half of its mandated force is there.
Sure.
And of that half, they just don't have the equipment they need. They can't.
These guys, these
fly
Gambians,
a helicopter over a.
No, I don't disagree that they need.
Just don't have them.
I think to fully engage with well-armed Janjaweed or rebel groups, they would need attack helicopters. But by all accounts, these truck hijackings are done by pretty small, 5 guys with AK-47s. And it's just, if you have an unarmed driver, they take the truck. So it seemed to me, again, I'm not saying this is the total solution, but like the Gambian peacekeepers I spoke to all had rocket-propelled grenade launchers. It's not, I understand that there's a much bigger thing, but I left there, I'll just say this, rightly or wrongly, with a sense of like, it might make most sense for UNAMID being there, just start doing something. You know what I mean? You can't do it all. I mean, and it's the world community's fault and it's Sudan's fault. You don't have everybody. Fine, but there seems to be like a focus on saying like we're here, but we don't have it, and we can't do this. It's like you just start somewhere, and then it seems to me like maybe things will go from there. I don't know.
Another thing interesting that I noticed from last week was that. I'm forgetting the name of the UN agency, but it's sort of the UN Air Service.
Right. Yep. Humanitarian Air Service.
Yeah, the Humanitarian Air Service, which is run by it's run by, is it WFP?
Yeah.
It's run by the World Food Program. That they had to sort of shut shop because they can't afford to keep their planes in the air, and they're reducing the number of humanitarian flights to Darfur as well. And you're talking about the problem of going through Darfur, on ground.
Sure.
They can't get there via helicopter now because there just aren't. They can't pay for the helicopter trips anymore.
Right. No, I see those press releases too, and I will say that in like standing in the middle of the Al Fasher camp and talking to WFP. She was mostly talking about the trucks, and so I sort of I don't know. Sometimes I see it seems so incongruous given the level of interest in European capitals, and I mean I can go on this trip. The ambassadors were really kind of, I don't want to say that they were grandstanding, but they made a big point. I mean there was a lot of press access in the sense of like they would come to us like every 10 minutes and say we're pushing al-Bashir. Like maybe I'll jump after this visit to Darfur. The whole team rushed back to Khartoum because this was the wrap-up meeting with President al-Bashir. And it actually was it was the same day that Luis Moreno Ocampo was in New York releasing a report that said that the entire
pause for a second.
Sure.
Ocampo is the chief prosecutor of the I.C.C, the International Criminal Court.
There we go.
Continue.
Yep.
Continue.
And he had released a report that he'd previously leaked, but that's another story. But this was the day where officially he released a report saying the entire Sudanese governmental apparatus may be engaged in war crimes, and he intends to have further indictments in July. So
that was a heck of a report.
It was, and a lot of the timing was kind of, I mean, again, it was kind of interesting because it suddenly you had people were like, well, is al-Bashir going to cancel the meeting? He's so angry, And I will.
And did
he did not cancel it. We went. So
there you go.
And it was in this it's called Friendship Hall. It's a big kind of Soviet style 1970s huge architecture, big room, and we went in, and as the press we were allowed to sort of see Bashir's opening statement, and then we were ushered out into a very ill-lit hallway where we were served Sudanese sodas. The Sudanese media was there in force. I mean, it may not be a free press, but it's a very active press. They're like, these guys are elbowing and filming and going crazy. But I mean, al-Bashir's speech was what it was. But afterwards, we got really both sides. We got the Sudanese side and the UN ambassador's side of what took place in the meeting, and it was pretty. In a way, the issues were very squarely raised. For example, Ambassador Soares, as he sort of hadn't said outright he would raise it, then he said he would raise it, did raise the I.C.C, inevitably. The International Criminal Court and Sudan's duty to turn over, two indictees, Ahmed Haroun and Ali Kusheit. He raised it, and by all accounts, President Bashir's response is, well, when the United States joins the I.C.C, he'll talk about that issue. Next question. and it's kind of afterwards I asked the U.S. ambassador, so what's the answer? And he said, it was Alejandro Wolf, it wasn't Khalil Zez, it was the deputy perm rep here. He said, well, the U.S.'s reasons for not joining the I.C.C. have nothing to do with Sudan's bad behavior, and anyway, they're required by a Security Council resolution to comply with those to give up the two arrestees. And the thing is, and again, that's true. The Sudanese response is, well, the U.S. has veto power. So even if the U.S. did something wrong, there would never be a Security Council resolution requiring them to comply. So they literally they drew a line in the sand, and I'm not saying it's a terrible government, they do terrible things, but there's a certain logic to that argument that I haven't heard anyone here, other than just sort of cling to it and say, well, Chapter 7, Yeah. But then we basically, if that's the best argument that can be mustered, we have a world in which everyone except 5 countries have to comply with the law. And those 5 countries are entirely above the law. And that's not, I can see why there are many countries, including some very brutal and horrible countries, that say that's not a legitimate, legal order. So I don't know, I'm not asking you to answer it, Mark, but what do you say to that?
Listen, the point is true, obviously. And frankly, it's one of the reasons I like to point out that an American will never be indicted by the International Criminal Court, so we have nothing to fear.
Correct.
Only things to lose. It's sort of a manifestation of what we lose by not joining this court. We lose sort of a bit of frankly, it's a little moral authority for being able to tell people.
In this case, I say any authority.
Or any authority, whatsoever. Obviously these are and these are the same people who have organized and perpetrated a genocide in Darfur, so they don't speak on.
No, absolutely.
I think they're clearly, it's an excuse to avoid justice, but the fact that it's sort of a stick a needle in your eye kind of excuse.
But I think, deep down, I hate to say, I'm just saying that argument has a certain logic. They may be entirely unqualified to raise it, but it's not. It's not even just a kind of a smart aside. It's an argument saying, where's the legitimacy of this legal order in which they didn't join the I.C.C. Fine, okay. So the idea is that even if you don't join, you're required to comply by a Security Council resolution, right? But then you have 5 countries that will never. Right.
They are members of the of the United Nations.
No,
General
and
Assembly.
they actually point out that they're a long-standing. They've been a member longer than most countries have existed. There was to try to keep things a little bit.
I'm just saying it is a sort of a rhetorical argument, and they're using to delay justice, to extend impunity for crimes that they have committed against their own population in Darfur.
Sure.
I mean that's sort of why they're saying what they're saying.
Right.
I mean, they might have sort of it is a snarky sort of aside, and frankly, as I said, it's true that the United States does have less authority to command other countries to apply to abide by sort of international law and hand over their suspects to the International Criminal Court when we ourselves are not a member.
Right. But also even right.
And but at the end of the day, they're doing what they're doing and saying what they're saying because they want to avoid justice.
Sure. No, there's no question. But I guess just on that, I don't think it's just George Bush. I think that there's not a small number of Americans that are offended by the idea of some unaccountable international organization having jurisdiction over the people. I don't know what. Go ahead.
The funny thing about that is polling consistently, and I'll put a link up to this polling data, consistently shows that Americans, when presented the facts about the I.C.C., are overwhelmingly supportive of it.
Right.
It's shocking. It's sort of counterintuitive to what you would think. But in fact, it's poll after poll after poll shows that Americans are more supportive of it's something like 60% or 66% are supportive of the International Criminal Court. There's a lot of misperception is a problem of the International Criminal Court, that once the U.S. joins, that George Bush and Rumsfeld are going to end up in the dock in The Hague. But that won't happen, and in many ways it can't happen.
Right.
Because there are certain safeguards.
No, I guess I meant the gut sense of, like, for example, if an American service member, runs over a kid in, let's say, in some country where U.S. soldiers are, I think that there are many Americans that would be like, don't put them on trial there. That's unfair, right? I think that.
Well, we had that happen, right, in Okinawa, where American service members were accused of raping a 12-year-old girl, and in fact, I believe that I might mess this up, but correct me if I'm wrong, but they're actually on trial in Okinawa, not under American jurisdiction, because the American government sort of waived their immunity. Does that ring a bell?
That's ringing a bell, but I know that, for example, the U.S. plane that negligently cut a cable of the cable car in Italy. These things happen. Right. I don't want to go on a tangent except to say that I think in the case of Sudan, the problem is not a problem is I would distinguish. I think some amount of saying we're suspect of an international body we didn't join is something that Sudan is not alone in. Now the reality is not only did they not investigate and prosecute Ahmed Haroun, they gave him a promotion and put him in charge of humanitarian affairs. So that was, and again, in part, that's also they're kind of like thumbing their nose at the system. I'm not at all defending what they're saying. I just want to say that they're not, the idea that the fact that there's reticence in that country to having to comply with something they didn't join, I think you find some of that sentiment in the U.S. Maybe not in the circles you're hanging in, Mark, but I don't think it's just a few people.
Well, right? No. It's clearly not just a few people, but
And I don't think it's an illegitimate point of view. Generally, people you choose to join it or you don't. Now there is a Security Council, so if you're a member of the UN, then you have committed to comply with Chapter 7 resolutions. That's true.
Yes.
Right.
The one last point I want to make is that sort of a distinction that I don't that people often don't draw when sort of, I guess, comparing what would happen in Sudan versus American soldiers, that we in the United States have a pretty robust judicial system that's functioning, that can and has, and we have our uniform military code of justice code. And we have standards, and we have
imagine the world,
a functioning judiciary.
Right, the world view of the OJ trial. I'm saying you and I both know it's a pretty robust. There's a lot of time spent on it, but there are some absurd outcomes. So, I'm not trying to equate anything except to say it's not. There's a different view here, and I think that I somehow distinguish. I guess here's the thing, and I'll try to jump this forward because I want it, and maybe it's not just being devil's advocate, but one thing I took from this trip after Sudan, we went to Chad, and obviously these are neighboring countries. There's something of a war or proxy war between them, and what was striking to me is that and I think this came up in our last discussion of this attack on Omdurman by the Justice and Equality Movement, that many people, certainly that group has been supported by Chad in the past. Whether this particular attack was funded by Chad or another country whose name begins with L is another question. But the issue, in fact, several of the ambassadors committed while standing in Sudan, saying, we're going to raise these same questions when we get to Chad, meaning, are you supporting rebels? Do you recruit child soldiers? Stuff like that. But when somewhere in the air between Khartoum and N'Djamena, there was a handoff in the leadership of the mission from the UK and South African ambassadors who co-led the Somalia and Sudan portion to alone the French ambassador who would lead the Chad and DR Congo portion of the trip.
Those being francophone countries.
Exactly.
Former French colonies.
But I think what soon developed was that everyone deferred to the ambassador of France, Jean-Maurice Ripert, sort of, how do you want to play it in Chad? And to be honest, the way he wanted to play it in Chad is no hard questions. In fact, the theme became, at least of the ambassador's inquiry, is, Chad, what can we do to help you on this spillover from Darfur? How can we, and the reality is so there was never a question asked, to my, at least in any hard way, in any kind of, compared to the grandstanding in Khartoum, the Chad thing was sweetness and light. Nobody said, you're supporting rebels, you need to stop, or
that's a shame.
Political opponents. It's a huge shame, and and what it left, I could continue to describe it, except to say, it strikes me, although it may be different in quantity, the idea of sort of a P5 member abusing its power. People always talk about China and Sudan, and that certainly happened. And China was very quiet on this trip. Ambassador Liu was there, but they didn't try to lead the Sudan thing. They didn't try to tell people don't ask questions. They just sort of observed. But France is very open in its open support for Chad, which is a participant in it whatever. It's a war basically between two countries, and they're not at all self-conscious. Nobody's saying to France, you better use your access to Debbie to change their behavior, or we're going to boycott cheese. Nobody says it. You know what I mean? But
People
the reality is,
I think if you read some of the sort of expert analysis from places like the International Crisis Group, they clearly say it.
Right, but they don't have the purchasing power of the number of people allied. I guess I'm saying it just struck me as like it's a little more complicated. At least I say this really in coming back from there that it's not necessarily helpful the degree to which the Council totally defers to France on all matters Chad. It certainly plays into Sudan's argument, if not belief, that there's like a double standard at play. But in reality, it was almost embarrassing, because it was embarrassing in the sense of, like, people say the Security Council is distorted by having China on it, therefore they can't be tough on Sudan. But to the eye, they at least tried to be tough, right? There's a lot of words spent, and there have been some indictments, there's talk of sanctions, but there's no question that the Council's approach to Chad is entirely captured and distorted by France. There's just no question. Now, maybe Chad's not as bad as Sudan, whatever, in whatever way we measure it. Okay, but it's not that good, in many ways. Human rights, press freedom.
Is like, the G word. No one accused Debbie of committing genocide, against his own people. Yes, they're clearly, sponsoring cross-border attacks.
And disappearing all their political opponents.
Exactly,
and stealing all the oil money so nothing is developed.
But the difference is again, that G word. That's why you don't have, calls to boycott Camembert.
Right. So if the G word were deployed, then that would happen. Again, I'm not. I guess I really think in a sense of, like, for some reason, I mean, Sudan there must change. You know what I mean? But I'm saying, if you spend, maybe it's like going native or something, but if you spend enough time listening, there is a double standard at work. That doesn't let them off, they shouldn't let them off the hook, but I don't think it's helpful, even in terms of, like, holding them to account, to give them arguments on a platter that are not bad arguments. For example, nothing was done about Chad. The other, I want to be sure to say it, in this Darfur camp, there it was, Lockheed Martin, you know what I mean? They ran it, they've gotten paid $190 million, they were chosen on a no-bid.
I'm surprised they let you in, Matthew.
I know there was some talk that I might, to not get too close to the windows of the planes. But what can they do? But the issue that arose there is and it does make you wonder. I hadn't actually thought of this one. I just look on it as, like, why would the UN enter into a huge no-bid contract with a U.S.-based military contractor? It just seems like it's giving it doesn't seem like a good management practice, and it's giving Sudan an argument. They ratcheted up the rhetoric while we were in Sudan and said, wait a second, if the U.S. has economic sanctions on Sudan, right? Which definitely, like, you can't use a credit card there. There's a lot of, again, they have a lot of oil wealth, and the city is Khartoum at least is booming. But they're definitely, you definitely like notice the sanctions. So what they've said is like it's totally no bid or competitive bidding. Lockheed Martin can't continue to make money in Sudan if the U.S. has sanctions. And they've said now that in July they're going to pull the visas of. Sudan agreed to give the UN one extension of this no-bid contract for 3 months. It runs out in June or July, I believe July. They said, which was, I guess, news, they said not only are they not agreeing to another extension, but there's going to be no more visas for PA&E or Lockheed Martin people to come and run those camps, which I know will then give rise to, like, they're not giving visas, they're stopping the peacekeeping. But this is something that the UN has known for years.
Matthew,
but why would the UN, with 2 years to prepare?
Hold on. They are, once again, this is just another excuse. They will find another excuse and another excuse and another excuse.
So the Lockheed contract is no problem. It's not. It's that. Listen, it was very wise of the UN to give a U.S.-based military contract.
I'm saying it's a convenient sort of punching bag, you know.
But then why give them the excuse?
This is just another. Well, you know, they'll think of another excuse.
That doesn't mean that this thing is defensible.
It's the same reason why they, you know, why they said, you know, well, if the United States is in the I.C.C, I don't have to give over my 2 indicted suspects.
But here I'm blaming the UN.
This
is one thing.
Well,
the UN,
again, they will just think of, and this is sort of their MO. This is what they've done. This is how they've been able to draw out this sort of hostile relationship between themselves and the rest of the world. This is why they've been draw out the conflict for so long in Darfur, is that they just, you know, think of another way to obstruct the UN.
But I think it's too convenient to say there are a couple of these arguments that have, and the UN can't do anything about the U.S. not joining the I.C.C. Okay, so that's that. But here's something the UN could do about it. I guess all I'm saying is you can definitely say, oh, well, they've just come up with something else. But let's talk. This thing is not really defensible. It's really not.
What if it was a French company there? They'd say, oh, the French, they support Chad. You know, we have to pull their visas.
Try it. I think it's pretty clear that to use a military contractor from a sworn enemy of a country as the UN's contractor in the country is just giving them an issue on a platter. It doesn't make sense. It's a big world. The U.S. is not the only one that can do the job, and they certainly had years before, but they've had 9 months since the controversy about this contract to find another contractor. And the amazing thing, and this is something that can neither be proved nor disproved. Basically, sources there said that Rich Williamson, right, the U.S. envoy to Sudan, he was there at the same time as this council delegation. He left sort of in a huff right before we got to Khartoum. That both the UN and the U.S. envoy were in their closed-door meetings with Sudan trying to convince them to further extend the Lockheed Martin contract. Now, you may say that this is because they need them and because they want the peacekeeping to work, but to have the U.S. using what entree it has in Sudan to try to negotiate for the lives of people faced with genocide, and to use that time to try to get business for a U.S. company is not acceptable. All right, I mean, and we can agree or disagree.
I have no quarrel with that. My point, you know, is just that this is yet another excuse, you know. It's just and they'll think of it.
Why give it to them? I'm just saying. I think
it's out for a few more years after that. You know, say they pull the visas, say a new company comes in, they'll think of something else to object to, and you know, no one's acted perfectly. Clearly, that's why we have that's why we have this problem. But they'll just you know they'll zoom in on something.
But I'm just saying, they're not just that there's two sides. Just because they're so wrong doesn't mean that everything on the other side is right. That's not the case.
I agree, but I just think that they are exploiting weaknesses in the international coalition.
Right, but then just don't throw them a softball. It seems to me.
Listen,
seriously.
Agree, but they'll find something else
to
that may be.
That may be, but that doesn't mean to keep throwing the same softball again and again. It doesn't.
Well, I agree with that for sure.
All right. I know. I'm glad. I think we're really mixing it up here. But
we
can now.
We're highlighting the differences here.
Proxy.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, because, and I think this is on an entirely different issue, or certainly a different temperate zone. The trip continued to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which after certainly, like in Sudan, there's no drinking, and I'm not commenting on my own intake, but there were many people in the delegation that were like, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
Not to say that it was no debauchery, but in arriving in Democratic Republic of Congo, everything was green. The mood was somehow, until we went to the Eastern Congo, the mood was sort of almost a celebratory one. Like the UN was saying, "Here's a country we've invested, several billions of dollars in peacekeeping in," but they had an election. And the president, unlike Chad, where actually President Deby didn't even meet with the delegation, that was the biggest irony, is that he's basically in power due to France's support, and he rebuffed them. And then the French ambassador tried to pretend it wasn't rebuffed. It got very ugly. But we got to Congo. No, seriously, it was
that's bearing the lead right there. That's a big deal.
It was a big deal, actually,
Yeah.
and he tried to downplay it. I mean, I didn't want to go on a tangent, but the claim of the French ambassador was that President Deby wasn't in the country, so it was no snub. But we were all sitting in this house in N'Djamena, and it really was a house. Like, it's a very strange. They met with the prime minister in basically in like somebody's living room, and we're all sort of hanging around there. And then the prime minister left to go to the airport to pick up Deby. And 3 hours later, Ambassador Ripert said, President Deby is still not in the country. That's why he's not meeting with us. And all the journalists were like, "No, he's in the country." And this continued the next day.
At him now, yes.
No, it really got bad. This radio reporter from the BBC said it was great. Said but Ripert said, "Well, I should have said he's not in the country to the best of my knowledge." And the guy and the reporter was like, "But you didn't say that."
Mm.
Then he was like, "It's my English," he said in perfect English. So then it literally led to this conflict where the ambassador didn't come back to the back of the plane or speak to the press for 36 hours or something. I actually put it in just as an aside, as sort of a footnote to a story, and was then confronted by the ambassador in the Rwandan airport. "Why did you write this?" I was like, I mean, it's true. It really wasn't I don't know. It just turned out. I think it all got very kind of. I think also at the same time, this Mr. Ripert learned that he was not going to be the head of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. Maybe you followed that. So I think since we've come back, everyone's tried to make up and go back to the same old news symbiosis at the stakeout. But things got pretty jumpy there, and it was just unfortunate. It was like he could have just said no comment or it's not a snub, but to say he's not in the country when he's in the country.
So sorry, that was an aside. You're about to talk about
the Congo
and boozing in the Congo.
I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said. I had to just say it because it was an event in the trip. But it was more.
Tell the story.
I mean, here's even in Kinshasa, they met with the president, and President Joseph Kabila, by all accounts, praised the council for its assistance, and praised the International Criminal Court. Said he's in full support of the I.C.C.
Yes.
And the skeptics on the trip said, well, yeah, because in the Congo, the I.C.C. has without exception, indicted opponents of Joseph Kabila,
right,
including most recently, this guy Bemba, who probably is definitely deserves it, but maybe maybe the president himself has had some role as a warlord in the past. Yeah. But literally right before probably the most prominent, although certainly discredited in some ways, but the guy who was the number 2 guy in the runoff against Kabila was indicted as a war criminal and is in jail in Belgium.
Yeah, we last Dialogue, sure. I talked with Richard Dicker of Human Rights Watch, and we chatted just as sort of the Bemba case.
Oh, I saw your headline on that. What would happen if Bemba. So here's so Kabila praised them, and then in a sort of a very lower profile meeting, we all got on the buses, or they got on the buses. The other journalists didn't want to go to something called the Palais du Peuple, which is another, sort of 70s style big, except it's the Congo, like all the lights were out in the hallway. You have these ambassadors like walking through. It's almost like an abandoned castle, and suddenly we came to a waiting room with an enormous 8-foot poster of President Kabila's father, Laurent Désiré Kabila, and then a room full of senators, elected senators of the Congo. Who berated the council, particularly about the indictment of Bemba, and said, he was a senator, so maybe it's sort of self-serving on their part. After which the ambassadors came out and acknowledged that they'd been, not held to account, sort of their feet were held to the fire about it. But then they said, but we have nothing to do with the I.C.C., and so we told them we can't answer for that.
Well,
which is technically true.
Well, yeah, it is. Well, and that's like that technicality is a very important point. The Security Council can't tell the prosecutor who to indict and who not to indict. They're like the ICC and the UN are two very separate entities.
But that
it's not
right.
like the ICC isn't like an agency of the UN.
Well, the connections are as follows. Number one, the Security
yeah.
Council can refer cases to the ICC,
As they did
and number
in
two,
Sudan.
they can also put the kibosh on a one-year basis
Yes.
on actions of the
Yes.
ICC. So I'm not saying I think the independence is good. It just all I'm saying
Yeah.
is that to the eye, unless you really get into the in one portion of the trip in Sudan, the ICC was a big topic, and the Council was talking all about it.
Right.
And then when Joseph Kabila praised them for the ICC's indictment, the ambassadors didn't say, "Oh, but we have nothing to do with that." They basked in the praise. But once they were kind of called to account for sort of the impartiality, and I will
Right.
say whether I don't, he seems like a good person, Luis Moreno Ocampo.
Yeah, he's great.
But on the ground,
I'm a fan. Yeah.
no, I'm a fan. I'm a fan as well. But I'm saying,
Yeah.
in going through, like for example, in the Congo, it's I don't know if short of indicting Joseph Kabila what he can do, but it comes off as partial. There are many people there that believe that it is either intentionally or unintentionally being used as sort of like it's part and parcel of the UN, sort of like we support Kabila regardless. We support the Congolese army even as they commit abuses, although we issue a report on the side.
You
know
know,
what I mean?
again, like, Ocampo doesn't answer to the Security Council.
Sure.
And he has, I guess the ICC has sort of member states that sort of would elect him and vote for him, but he's pretty independent. I mean, that's frankly his independence is one of the reasons that the U.S. is scared of joining the ICC, is that the prosecutor, is not sort of controlled
Sure.
by political entities.
But for example, why hasn't he
yeah.
indicted any rebel groups in Sudan? Or where is that? Where's that
Well,
going?
As you know, he stopped. He made he gave his big report to the Security Council last week, in which he said that there was this big criminal conspiracy on the part of the government, and he was very clearly it's suggested that the next round of indictments were going to come out pretty soon, possibly July, and suggested very strongly that they would include sort of top levels of the government. It did not rule out, though, that there would also be sort of rebel groups in the mix. And who knows? He very well might include rebel groups.
Yeah,
So
that's
you
been.
never
I
know.
guess so. The other thing that strikes me, maybe this is actually a topic here today, is his first indictments were of the Joseph Kony of the LRA.
Yeah,
but it seems like
we'll
because
circle back there. Yeah.
exactly, but because the council is in support of this negotiation right now with Kony, you do not see Luis Moreno Ocampo demanding that Joseph Kony be arrested. In fact, you have a UN envoy meeting actively with Joseph Kony, shaking his hand and talk, which maybe is all to the good. But I'm saying to claim that he's totally not aware of the political ramifications of his approach to different indictments or to bringing other indictments, I don't agree with.
Well, I don't think I've categorized it that way, but I would be hard pressed to say that Ocampo does not care or has not spoken out on the need to arrest and indict Kony. I think if we went to the ICC website right now, that would be sort of demonstrably wrong.
Sure.
Tripped on
Let's
my
look at
words
the
there.
volume of pronouncements. Be comparing the two, and I think I know it because when he comes to the UN and when he does a stakeout or a press conference, Darfur is the issue, and you end up having to ask him. Go ahead.
Well, the reason Darfur is the issue is because the UN, the Security Council, told him to investigate Darfur.
Correct.
That's their main relationship. He doesn't have to answer to the Security Council on any other issue other than Darfur.
But they come and they brag about their indictment of Thomas Lubanga because it's the first indictment that dealt with child recruitment. And that wasn't a council indictment. That was him doing it. But he understands that that's a very popular indictment at the Security Council. I think there's something there. I guarantee you. I don't think that he knows enough to not say, yes, he's going to waive any indictments. And I think he's against that personally. But I think you look at the volume of pronouncements. I mean, let me put it to you this way. Denouncing the Sudanese government is very popular with the most powerful country on earth, right? And that's not why he does it, but that is true, isn't it? Sure. If he were to announce an indictment of JEM or another rebel group for Haskanita or some abuse that they committed in Darfur, I think there would be some. For example, I'm not saying he's running scared of Mia Farrow. I'll just use her as a placeholder. that would say this is a diversion, he's made a mistake, he's kept his eye off the ball. And I say that because since coming back from the trip, I went to a media breakfast with Mia Farrow, and she meets, I won't characterize it except to say, because of the things that I saw on the trip, I asked her, what does she think of the gem attack on Khartoum? What impact does it have on the movement to stop the genocide in Darfur? And so I said, what do you think of this gem attack? And basically the answer was, that's getting too factual. Step back. The big picture is, this is a government that kills its own people. And okay, that's the big picture. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to address the other things. And so I can, by that same logic, Ocampo indicting one of the rebel groups for some abuse, or an individual in it, I can see there's some people that would say, this is a mistake. You've lost, you're making moral equivalence. This is another term she used. Don't make any moral equivalence. Let's keep our eye on the ball. All right, but there comes a point, she disagrees, even, there's another expert, Alex DeWall, maybe you've had him on or not. She said, he's too factual too. He knows too much. These are direct quotes. This is like, we have breakfast with Mia Farrow, and it's very, I don't say that, she's been to the area. She means well, but there's a sense in which it's like, it's almost a cartoon. Like maybe you're right. Maybe in the fullness of time, this is the person that really has. She made the analogy to Hitler. She said Hitler doesn't get to choose which troops come in. So if it is Hitler, then it's true. To talk about sort of side issues or the rebels' behavior is a diversion. But is it really helpful to say, you're getting too factual? I don't know.
No,
I'm sorry. I'm totally.
I don't think, again, I feel like we circled back to this, but I feel like most of the activists, I talk to are not Mia Farrow, and they all sort of get and understand that rebel groups are not angels, and I don't see them siding with the rebels in this. I see them, that may have been the case in 2005, from maybe 2003 to 2005. But ever since then, when the rebel groups have fractured, have splintered, I don't see in talking with them much support for rebels over Khartoum. I think it's the government of Sudan is still primarily responsible because they are the government, because they did unleash the genocide.
Right.
However, the rebels are certainly not blameless, and they're certainly to a large degree part of the problem.
Right. No, I think I
in
would
terms of banditry,
right.
What we talked about earlier.
No, I would distinguish between people necessarily saying we're in full support of the rebels, so much as saying that let's just take it as an example. Let's say Ocampo's next round of indictments, which supposedly are coming out in July, that by all accounts will definitely include people in the Sudanese government more senior than Ahmed Haroun. Let's say there were 3 indictments, one of which was a rebel commander. I think that there are some that would say this is a mistake. This is creating moral equivalence. This is a diversion. You know what I mean? Maybe not. Maybe we move in different circles. It's not just Mia Farrow.
It's not because if you were to read the indictment and the indictment is just a factual account of crimes that were committed.
Right.
So if he indicts a leader of GEM of one of the rebel movements, it will list in the indictment accusations of things that this rebel commander did or was under this commander's sort of chain of command responsibility, crimes that happened. And they're going to be horrible things. There's going to be rape. There's going to be for murder of children. There's going to be a lot of really bad things if the prosecutor decides to indict. It's not, the indictments, have a political effect, but essentially they're sort of legal documents.
Right, but there's choices made.
Sort of facts on the ground.
Right. Just, and then we go back to the Congo, but on this, that gem attack, and not to be, since we last spoke, it's been pretty much, I've asked UNICEF, I've asked, everyone that I could ask, and the UN knows and confirms that in the gem attack that was stopped in Omdurman outside of Khartoum, there were 89, underage, significantly underage child soldiers.
Yeah.
And it's now also pretty much emerged that these people were recruited actually from the camps in Goz Beta in eastern Chad by GEM. I mean, so it's all the whole kind of, what would you say? The logistics are all clear. That's a crime, right? People have been indicted by the I.C.C. for recruiting, 12-year-olds to fire guns. Right?
Right.
So it's an entirely indictable crime. The evidence is all there. for Mr. Ocampo, whoever else,
well, I mean,
to say.
you say
but then the
that,
question
but
is 89
they actually,
enough?
like, have to
Correct.
collect this happened sort of 3 weeks ago.
Right.
They have to go and collect. They're not going to say, "Oh, I read about it in the paper. That has to be a crime." They actually go there. They do interviews. They collect
are they doing
evidence.
UNICEF has interviewed all these people.
I don't know.
Right, no, exactly. But I think maybe the reason I think this jumped to me is I agree. But I think I look for people that disagree with me to talk with them. But on this issue, even if you had a very factual indictment of a rebel group from Darfur, there are some I honestly believe that would say, well, 89 is not that much. How many has the government done? You know what I mean? It's like I don't know. I mean, I don't know where it's written. I know what the Rome statute says, and it doesn't. There's no like bright line test of when the number of child soldiers recruited becomes actionable. But 89 seems probably it is.
But what you again when you read the indictments, they don't say he killed 7,000 people in this town.
Right, they're very specific.
It's like it's like a one by one thing that they go through. I mean, that they'll say like in this village, this person witnessed this happen, and these 3 people died.
Right.
It's sort of like it's very minute. It's called it's something they did in the Milosevic trials, where they pioneered this. Is you collect evidence from what they call the crime base, the actual crimes that happen. And then the tricky part is linking the commanders to the crimes on the ground.
Right.
But you establish the crimes on the ground, and it's not like you can't just say, "Oh, he killed 3,000 people." It's a collection of actual individuals that were killed or were raped or were, terrible things that happened to them.
Right. No, I guess I'm just saying like that.
You want to get back to
we can definitely. I'm just on that thing of the child soldiers of Omdurman. All I mean is it may not be the biggest crime, but it's one that's documented. The UN has confirmed it exists. So in a sense, it's going to. I mean, I'm also like, what's going to happen with them? Are they going to be released? What's happening, right? But I think it's very, everything is in the details, right? So it's sort of like I mean, I think it's like you say a prosecutor's independent, but it's a big world. So somebody's making decisions, and the question is, what's the basis of the decision? Is it entirely looking at the gravity of the crimes? Does to any degree does the views. I'm just saying we had a debate here today about Kosovo, and there's no question that like the views of the United States are extremely powerful. They in fact can lead the Secretary General to say, "I'm going this direction." It'd be an enormous decision for the Secretary General to say, "I'm going to go in a direction that the U.S. doesn't agree with."
Yeah.
Now Ocampo is more independent than the Secretary General, but is he entirely oblivious to the political reactions to the indictments that he brings? I'm not saying that he's not. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to me that that's a crazy question, given what's actually the indictments that have been brought.
Yeah.
All right.
It's not a crazy suggestion.
Okay, that's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking for, Mark. We're going to jump to Goma, because then we can go off road. But I want to say the council, to its credit, not only went to Kinshasa and met with the bigwigs. Yeah. A subset of the council flew out to Goma in the eastern Congo. And it was a subset because I'd heard of this volcano, but it's a big thing. There's a big volcano over Goma, and it has erupted, and the airstrip, the Goma airport, is at least 1/3 covered by lava.
Jeez. And
so the plane that we were all on can't land there. Goma's been impacted ever since. I actually asked it would cost $15 million to chisel or jackhammer the lava off the runway.
God.
This seems like a good project for somebody. That's in the same way. This is my pitch, whether it's George Clooney and Ocean's 14 or whether it's the EU, somebody needs to get the lava off the runway, because. Okay, so we went in a small plane, and it's a beautiful. To tell you that, I mean, for what it's worth, it's one of the most beautiful places I've seen. It's like it's cool, it's lush. It's like somebody said, and it's true. It looks like Switzerland in Central Africa, but it's also obviously a place that's known for some of the most extreme and violent militia behavior anywhere on the planet.
Yeah,
including sexual abuse and as they put it yesterday, mutilation of women by militias. Yeah. And the sad. I mean, it's also this is, and it's not to say that the other countries are not. The Congo just was such a vibrant place. Like street vendors, like there were these guys both in the capital and Goma. Like they would take these 10-year-old photocopy machines and put them by the side of the road with a generator and like sell photocopies. And in Goma, they're like these huge wooden bicycles. These guys like take like a joist, big wheels, and they nail a little bit of rubber around the wheels and use it to like move like 500 pounds of cement or flour or propane tanks. So there's just a lot of kind of energy. But the sad part is we go outside of Goma to this Mugunga 1 internally displaced persons camp, and you have suddenly in the middle of like what's countryside, 10,000 people living very close quarters in huts with plastic UNHCR roofing, and the floor is all lava, and there's guns everywhere, like all obviously the council went to visit, so we're surrounded by like UN MONUC people in body armor, but there's also like the Congolese army, and like the people that we talked to as we went off road were just like, there are too many guns in the area, and they really, in fact, I think that I had gone in thinking like this would be, that the bad militias, the FDLR, who are historically Hutu, and the ex-genocide people. But in fact, a lot of the people in these camps were Hutu themselves, which doesn't mean that that's prevalent. It's just sort of and because there's also there's the sort of Tutsi Defense Force, the CNDP of General Nkunda. So you basically have a region with like, despite the peace that's come over some other parts of the country, where there are absolutely like warring militias and civilians totally uprooted and their lives are kind of destroyed right now due to it. And it's very it's sort of to tip your hat to the UN that the food is being delivered, et cetera, but it's a very, this was kind of a very, people look more frightened there actually than in the Zamzam camp in Darfur, frankly, just in terms of like the possibility for violence 10 feet outside the camp. And I don't know, the sort of the hype suggestion that's come out is, the initial idea was that there were various agreements, the Nairobi Agreement, the Goma Agreement, that these they call them ex-genocide, although it's like sort of second generation genocide people, that the FDLR militia should be pushed back into Rwanda to face justice or become reintegrated. It appears that that's not going to, that either the Congolese army doesn't have the wherewithal, or the international community doesn't have the guns to really like push them back in. So the new proposal is literally, and I heard this, is to relocate them.
Yeah, to the other part of the country, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like NIMBY. To me, in my mind, it's sort of like who is going to accept this like most murderous of militias?
Well, and also they don't speak the language.
Exactly.
So you're putting this whole population in this like other part of the country where they just like don't speak the language, don't know anyone, kind of problem. At the same time, you can't just have this roving militia forever. I mean, it like you say, from all the descriptions I've heard, it's one of the most hellish places.
These are really, when they said the U.S. really misused that term, the worst of the worst. If you want to find the worst of the worst, they may not be in Guantanamo Bay. They might be in like Eastern the Kivus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just. And yesterday there was a big all-day council debate on rape as a tool of war, and this, I think the subtext of most of this, although a lot of people were, I mean, it is obviously connected. You can say Janjaweed, but I think that the sort of the engine behind that issue has been the Congo and this sort of just incomprehensible.
Well,
go ahead, you tell me.
No, I mean, not long ago, I interviewed filmmaker. Who
the silence, right? The silence of the Congo.
The greatest silence, rape in the Congo, and she and we had her on UN Plaza, and she sort of described her movie, and I believe she also sort of had a showing of it at the UN itself.
She did actually. I went.
It's horrific.
Horrific.
It's just the it's a systematic brutalization of women in the Eastern Congo. And it's just a self-perpetuating social crisis there.
And somebody pointed out to me while I was there is that in a way, now the militias are back to the FDLR went into a refugee camp and killed 9 people, and the Nkunda forces are sort of flexing their muscles, etc. But he was saying is like it's not even as it's certainly like a problem in conflict, but it's kind of something has spiraled out of control such that even when temporarily the conflict sort of subsides, the abuse continues unabated, and it's almost like his theory was that it's like sublimation, like you take like I don't know, it's terrible, and I do not to be flip, but this idea of somehow like relocating the FDLR
Yeah.
One, it's like, how do you get the consent? Or I guess maybe you don't need consent, but clearly, like in the U.S., like if people like fight against having like a waste disposal, waste transfer station in their neighborhood, like bringing the FDLR is like about the most extreme thing you could do. It almost like somebody I spoke to a UN spokesperson who wanted to be unnamed, but was definitely said, well, in the Balkans War, they took Serbs and Croats and moved them to Winnipeg, and by mistake put them in the same building, but at least they weren't killing each other. This is the analogy he gave. But I don't know if anyone's proposing to like take the FDLR to the first world.
I think in the United States, I think our asylum seeker policy allows the government to sort of locate asylum seekers wherever sort of we want.
Sure.
Does that ring a bell? I mean,
no, absolutely.
It's the reason why there's so many
New Hampshire,
Somalians
Minneapolis.
in Maine.
Right.
There are many Somalis or Sudanese actually, in small towns in Maine because of this.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of Somalis in Minnesota, and there's a lot there.
Yeah.
So the question is like the FDLR. Who wants the FDLR?
Right. I mean, it's like a murderous, band of genocidaire. But politically, though, it's a resource conflict as well.
Right.
And the cell phone I use to talk on this, and the camera is part of the problem because it has that mineral coltan, which is used in the battery that powers laptops and also small electronics, is found in eastern Congo.
It's incredible. I mean, as people may know, like the uranium for either Hiroshima or Nagasaki came from the Congo. It really is like the cliche of sort of like cursed by wealth.
Yeah.
It's just but I mean, I think even there, it's sort of like the one thing, and this is maybe we'll I couldn't go through a trip without sort of like not this was raised and to me was extremely troubling. I mean, the UN has a big peacekeeping force in the Congo.
Yes.
Okay, right? 20,000 people. It's actually, it still is the biggest, although UNAMID in Darfur is at least scheduled to be bigger, but whether it will ever become bigger, we don't know. But in a recent conflict in right there in the Kivus, where the forces of General Nkunda, which is self-styled defender of Tutsis, very effective soldiers, fought, engaged with the Congolese army, and routed the Congolese army. Basically, 4,000 Nkunda troops totally took the weapons of and caused the retreat of 20,000 Congolese soldiers. By all accounts, the UN asked its peacekeepers in the region, who are Indian. They actually split the Kivus. Like the Indians have one part of the Kivu and the Pakistanis have another part. To engage, to provide support to the Congolese army, so they didn't like get routed and lose all their weapons. And I'm really told on pretty good sourcing that support was not provided. That a call was made to New Delhi and the peacekeepers returned to the base. On the theory of sort of, and it certainly is the route took place. So then the question becomes of, did the UN have, despite providing logistical help to the Congolese army, were there no orders given to sort of not directly engage Nkunda's forces, but sort of like make a buffer or, fire some warning shots, kind of, and I think, I asked the Manuk people, and they claimed that their orders were somehow misunderstood, that there's different interpretations of orders. But I think that there's it goes back to, instead of the extreme cases we've talked about of sort of like sexual abuse by peacekeepers or trading of golden guns by peacekeepers, it's not, again, maybe it's ultimately these contingents, they called their capital. When they got an order to fight what's thought of as a very effective fighting force, they didn't just say, we've got on the blue helmets, of course, They called home and they said, do we do it? And they were told, you don't do it. And the UN, because as you yourself, they need peacekeepers. So there's been an attempt to sort of not really sharpen this and say, like, what happened, But that's pretty troubling, right? It's pretty troubling that this is, it's sort of like, what's the point of having peacekeepers? And actually, I think we will engage on this one. This whole issue of Abyei in southern, we'll jump back to Sudan. The issue has been raised squarely. Why did the UN peacekeepers stay in their base while a town that's a disputed town between South Sudan and Khartoum was being essentially destroyed and vacated of all people? Do you know that? This was raised this week by the U.S. guy. Williamson came and said it was shameful what the UN did. And the UN defended itself and said, he should look more closely at the mandate. We couldn't do it. And then you look at the mandate, and the mandate says they're, authorized under Chapter 7 to defend civilians. So I'm not sure what happened. I don't mean to create like a straw man argument, but this was it's a kind of I don't want to say it's not, obviously UNIMID should be fully staffed up, but there are issues in terms of just like actual use of personnel. Do you know what I mean?
I don't have the answer for you, unfortunately. It's not just not
Okay,
an
I'm
issue.
sorry. It's okay. You've had a lot of answers.
This particularly is not something I followed, with
Okay.
great.
And then I will say, just to be snarky, Rich Williamson, once he made a co-appearance with Mia Farrow here this week on Tuesday. It appeared both in the news and in reality very shortly thereafter at a John McCain fundraiser in Chicago.
Well, there you go.
Gunning for a position. He's gunning for a position.
That's not surprising. He's
As is everyone. I'm not. There's nothing wrong with it.
I don't really know much about it. I didn't know. I thought he was just kind of a career guy. I didn't know he was much of a political appointee, but apparently he is.
Right. There you go. Politics
is
not a dirty word. But in fact, I think this is grist for your mill, though, because it actually, when I realized that, I said it was so strange to have Rich Williamson, who the first time I saw him was very kind of surprisingly sort of go along to get along. He was like, I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to just see that we get the deployment going. He's a very kind of like hands-on, get things done guy. And yet this week, the criticism of the UN was pretty tuned up. He was saying, kind of the UN sat by while houses were burned 25 feet away.
There's a history.
And I realized
there's
that's kind of
history
popular
there of sort of acrimony between Williamson and the General Secretariat, I believe. I've seen a letter he wrote criticizing sort of the UN for the speed of its deployment of UNIMID, and what he said. There's no reason why you can't, why you have to have what are called self-sustainability requirements for your troops, which means that the troops once in the field should be able to take care of themselves in case there are certain contingencies. They said, well, there's no reason why you should have those, and that's just slowing deployment. You should just get the troops there and worry about it later. And the UN says, we've done this before in peacekeeping, and disaster ensues if we don't have these self-sustainability requirements. One can make the snarky point: would the United States put its troops in a place as hellish as Darfur and not have an exit plan, not have sort of other contingency plans in case something goes wrong, and not provide those troops with the right equipment for them to sustain themselves? So there's I think a bit of acrimony there.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, exactly. But I think I did. Being a real skeptic, it suddenly the rhetoric changed in such a way where I realized, like, it is, as you know, it's. And I'll say this is why I say it's sort of grist for your mill. It's not unpopular, certainly among prospective Republican Party secretaries of state or whatever else, to throw the dig at the UN for being kind of like namby-pamby and standing by while there's genocide, right?
This guy, Scott Paul from Citizens for Global Solutions, who's been on UN Dispatch before, likes to make the point that, an election season, the UN takes a big hit, inevitably. You saw it a bit in the Republican primary, where you had, I think it was Romney who said sort of the UN is so illegitimate because they won't arrest Ahmadinejad when he gave his speech in New York.
Right. No, I remember that.
Like
I
a
actually
convenient sort of whipping boy, and it's a favorite sort of scapegoat just to, it's like a base mobilization kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but that's why that's why I think it is what I perceive it as grist for your mill, and I did note it objectively that I think. It's an open question whether the level of... Because what was interesting is that the NGOs that Williamson was speaking with, which included John Prendergast and Mia Farrow, and they were very much... The word China came up many times. And Williamson was surprisingly kind of going a different direction and saying he wasn't criticizing the Security Council process, he wasn't pointing the finger at China, he was pointing the finger at sort of the UN, DPKO. In a way that Mia Farrow, John Prendergast were not at all. So they were sort of like on the same page, but not on the same page.
Should we wrap it up there? It's been an hour.
We can. Yeah. There was a big Kosovo thing today, but the upshot is no one can stop the inexorable handover by the UN of its powers to the European Union.
That freedom ring, right?
Yeah, whatever. So although they say 150 countries say no, but as Serbian statement said that a powerful minority is driving UN policy, and people say what's new.
Awesome. So until next time.
All right. No, definitely. Thanks a lot, and I'll be watching. How are you going to get your feedback on what your next on our off week
in the
plans?
comments section
online?
So I'm gonna
that's definitely.
I'll read through the comments. Hopefully, I just what will be interesting to you. That's really
right.
sort of what I want to see. And listen, if you want to take the camera one time, by all means,
I actually maybe this is good. I'm gonna take on the blogging heads administration, because I think that there could be.
Bob's gonna shut you down.
No, not at all. I want to say, because I've noticed that even in some of the comments that people seem to know a lot more about the technology behind this than I do. That there are people in the UN system that would be great to sort of like engage with and disagree with. Many of them, though, it's sort of the most natural way to do it would be to go to their office or approach them in the hall with a video camera. Not so much.
Well,
I have a harder time selling it to them like sit in their office with a laptop. I'll sit on another floor with a laptop.
I talked to Nick Birnback on this.
Does it work?
He was game, so
Oh, okay. No, he's a high tech guy. I'm talking about I'm not just talking about ambassadors of some funny countries, but a lot of. It's surprisingly a lot of the movers and shakers here are not that high tech.
Well,
let me be honest with you. They're really not.
Yeah.
Sadly,
it's a brave new world out there. All right, I'm.
No, but you're right. I think it could be.
Yeah.
On that, enough is enough.
Stop and capture.
Okay.